I'm delighted to be with all of you, and I welcome everyone from around the world to CMED's webinar on the current situation in America. The event is organized by the UCLA Center for Middle East Development and co-sponsored by the Berkel Center for International Relations and the Luskin Department of Public Policy, both at UCLA. You know, when we first envisioned this session in late October, we thought it would be a calm discussion about what became the future Biden administration. Instead, as you all know, what's happening now, we intend to deal with all the relevant topics, but there will be no speeches or presentations. We will begin with a brief discussion with our two speakers and then move on to take as many of your questions as possible. We expect many. We received the first question yesterday already, so we have an idea of what's coming. Our group today involves many from the United States and an equal number from around the world, especially the Middle East. Let me introduce our two speakers who will be answering all the questions and beginning with answering mine. Jim Pickup, who I know many of you know, is President and CEO of the Middle East Investment Initiative, MEII, and General Counsel of the Aspen Institute from 1997 to 2014. Jim was a partner and associate at DLA Piper, an international law firm. In 2000 and 2001, he served as Senator George Mitchell's representative when the senator chaired the Sharm el-Sheikh Fact-Finding Committee, an international committee established to examine the crisis between the Israelis and Palestinians and to make recommendations to the American government to prevent its recurrence. Mr. Pickup graduated from Georgetown University Law Center, received a master's in international affairs from Columbia University, and graduated with honors from the University of St. Andrews, Scotland. Jay Footlik, our second participant today, is managing partner in Third Circle Inc., a Washington, D.C. based consulting firm. He represents Fortune 500 companies, governments, ministries, high net worth individuals, and others seeking opportunities in the MENA region. He formerly served as special assistant to President Clinton in the White House, where he worked on a range of domestic and foreign policy issues, including extensive work in the Middle East. He also served as the president's liaison to the American Jewish community. Mr. Footlik earned a BA in political science from UCLA, specializing in American foreign policy and the Middle East. I knew him well and have since, I'm proud to say. He has a law degree from Loyola Law School of Los Angeles and is a member of the Maryland State Bar. Jay is also a professional actor and has been a member of the Screen Actors Guild since 1979. Indeed, in the movie Redemption Day that opened 2 days ago, he plays the role of President of the United States. Okay, let's get going. And my first question is to Jim. I thought we had an election. Whoever wins becomes president. The other guy says, too bad. And that was it. This has not happened this time. The loser, the president, now the president of the United States for 6 more days, thought he won or thought he could say he won, and all hell has broken loose since. How do you assess all of this and where are we going? Huge question.
Yes, exactly. Where to start? So, this has been a norm-busting presidency from day one. And, I think a lot of us thought that the post-election environment would be no different. And you saw leading up to the election, there were a lot of questionings of the president from the media of whether he would honor a peaceful transfer of power. And of course, that did not come to fruition. What we saw immediately following and really even leading up to, I think this was telegraphed from the White House. The president is famous for saying the quiet parts out loud. The legal team was in place for weeks before the election, and conversations were being had with state legislatures. Litigation was in place challenging mail-in ballots and other efforts to keep that were changing the election process largely due to COVID. So following that, it was no surprise that they challenged everything from fraud to their observers weren't allowed in to any number of things. And over 60 lawsuits were filed and rejected by both Republican and Democratic appointed judges. I think, from my standpoint, and given the, particularly the events of the last week, the real lesson for all of this is, we've been shaken, clearly, maybe shaken but not stirred, in the sense that the institutions have held. The courts did their role. Elected officials, in most cases, where it really counted, did their jobs. The Republican governor of Arizona, the Republican governor and the Republican secretary of state of Georgia, the state legislatures, Republican dominated in Pennsylvania and Michigan, all where it really would have been disruptive if they had gone with the president in a very anti-democratic and worrisome way, held. And you saw that up until the 6th, when Vice President Pence did his constitutional duty in ministerially certifying the vote. So, we have a lot to do to mend the fences and mend the damage that has been caused. And I do not dismiss the fact that, 138 Republican members of Congress, members of the House, still voted to not certify the Pennsylvania vote following the occupation and the riot that happened at the Capitol. We have a lot to do to repair our democratic institutions, but we are still going to have an orderly transfer of power next week on the 20th, and we will have a new president and a new administration.
All right, we've got a lot more to discuss on that. Let's go to Jay Footlik, and I have this question for you, Jay, about the Middle East. How does all of this affect the Middle East?
Well, I don't think the events of the past week necessarily have a dramatic impact on the Middle East. I think it's interesting to also, say that however you read the election results, and there will be for many, many months to come, probably years to come, people dissecting this particular election and trying to understand lessons learned. For example, do we need to adjust our polling? Most of the polls leading up to this election showed Democrats within striking distance of retaking the U.S. Senate. Now, we did eventually, but we didn't do all that well on election day. We have to remember that 73 million plus Americans still voted for President Trump. I say the good news for Democrats is that this president-elect, Joe Biden, received more votes than any president in history. The bad news is Donald Trump received the second most votes of any candidate in history. Interestingly, though, the lessons that we'll take away from this election, I think, will focus primarily on domestic issues, on the fabric of our country, on the COVID response, on the economic well-being of our country. Those are the issues that are, I think, driving a lot of the frustration that we see in the streets, a lot of the political discourse, the divisions that we have witnessed, not just over the past week, but really throughout the past 4+ years. Very few Americans voted for either Joe Biden or Donald Trump on the basis of foreign policy, first of all, and certainly very few on the basis of foreign policy toward the Middle East. Now, it's an area of the world, it's a region that we care deeply about, many of us. And I do think that you'll see some continuity and some differences with the new administration. On the continuity side, I think there are some achievements from the previous or outgoing administration that the new administration, the incoming administration, will certainly want to build upon, try to build upon. The Abraham Accords, for example, that's provided some extraordinary opportunities that I think the new administration will try to leverage, whether it's for expanding the accords to other countries, solidifying certain issues in the region itself. For example, the ongoing effort towards GCC reconciliation, which took a major step forward last week, but still has a ways to go. Economic issues driving the region as well. The new administration can sort of pick up, hopefully, from where the Trump administration left off, and try and add to that. There will be differences. Surely we'll expect to see a different tone and level of discourse, in particular directed towards, for example, the issue of Palestine. I'm sure reestablishing contacts and communication and discourse with the Palestinian Authority. I don't think that you'll see a dramatic and immediate effort to engage Israelis and Palestinians in bilateral talks or in trying to resume a peace process. Surely will play a role if there's a role to play there. But I do think that the administration will want to signal to our traditional allies, particularly our transatlantic allies, that there is a new administration, an administration that appreciates the strong and longstanding alliances and relationships that have been built up, especially this particular president who has worked so deeply and so passionately on those issues throughout his time in public office over the last 3 to 4 decades. He'll want to signal that very, very quickly. And he'll want to certainly address the issue of Iran. But he'll have to face, and he and his team will have to face, the fact that it's not simply a matter, for example, of rejoining or not rejoining the JCPOA, right? The world has not stood still over the last 4 years. There have been many changes both in the region and here at home. And I think any efforts to sort of re-engage Iran will have to take into account those changes that have occurred over the past 4 years.
You know, one thing,
Yeah,
if I could just jump in, one
go right
challenge, one challenge that the events of the last week are going to give to the incoming administration is that historically, the United States, through Republican and Democratic administrations, has been the foremost promoter of democracy and democratic transitions around the world. And these events, the events of immediately following the election and the insurrection on Capitol Hill, undermine our credibility around the world. And that is going to take some time to rebuild.
Agreed. I'll add one other thing, which is just, I think, something of interest particularly for our friends overseas who are participating today. We tend to look at yesterday's action through a very partisan lens. And while it was an overwhelmingly partisan vote, it was perhaps the most bipartisan impeachment in American history. Now, granted, there haven't been a ton of impeachments, but the fact that you had 10 Republicans voting with Democrats, the fact that you had Liz Cheney voting as well, who's number 3 in the Republican House leadership with the Democrats is very, very significant. Now, we don't, of course, know exactly what this means for a trial in the Senate, and we can certainly talk about this in greater detail if there's an interest, if there are questions about this. A lot of what we expect to occur, I mean, we're really in uncharted waters. It's not a given that you can really hold a trial in the Senate for a president who has already left office. There is some precedent for holding a trial for other federal officials once they have departed. Not sure what it means in the context of a president of the United States. And there are legal issues, there are political issues. Does it make sense if the Senate is conducting an impeachment trial? Historically, they cannot engage in any other work simultaneous to that impeachment trial. And if you're the incoming Biden administration, do you really want the first several weeks or months of your administration to be consumed with the Trump administration and something that would would be very, very divisive in nature, as opposed to starting off on a very positive note, trying to enact legislation. You're really the most powerful when you first step into office and you have perhaps, it used to be a 100-day honeymoon is what they would refer to it as. I'm not sure we'll have that much time, or the Biden administration will have that much time, but there will be many, many questions moving forward. They may also impact policy, both domestic and foreign.
Thank you, Jay. I have a lot more questions, but I'm going to go instead to the questions from all of you that are beginning to come in. And the first one is picks up from where you left off. It's from Antonio Demu from Athens, Greece. An old friend, what could the impeachment trial, you just started on this, what could the impeachment trial mean for the first days of the Biden presidency? Either one of you want to get into that a little more than we have?
Well, I mean, it's a really tough decision here. On the one hand, I think Democrats, and we know some Republicans, want to signal to not only Donald Trump, but to future presidents and office holders that there have to be consequences to actions and words. You know, about 3 miles from where I'm speaking to you right now is the U.S. Capitol, and it is filled with 15,000, 20,000 National Guard. I'm told that this is the largest contingent of troops at the U.S. Capitol since the Civil War. I mean, these are extraordinary times. These are not scenes that Americans are used to seeing on our screen. As Jim referenced, I think these are scenes that we're used to lecturing about in other countries, not in our own. And so I do think that it's going to be not just a legal choice of whether or not to pursue this in the Senate. You know, the Senate will change hands in a sense on the 19th when they come back into business, really on the 20th, once the vice president is sworn in, and she would, in theory, cast the deciding vote, which would make it a Democratic controlled Senate. There won't be any business. The Senate is out of session until the 19th, the day before the inaugural. So a political decision really has to be made as well as to whether or not any capital and resources, time and energy has to be devoted to focusing on convicting the president in what would be a very lengthy and emotional and traumatic trial in the Senate versus enacting President Biden's agenda. The last thing I'll say is that it's not just a symbolic issue as well. If the president is convicted in the Senate, there can be a second vote. A conviction in the Senate, by the way, would require 2/3 of the senators to convict, after which there could be a second vote to bar him from ever holding office again. And that vote is a simple majority, just 50+1. So there are some very real practical implications. And there are some tough choices that the incoming administration will have to make.
Absolutely. It may be helpful to think through the kind of the mechanics of how this works, because I think there's some implications here. You know, one, the House is in recess until the 19th. We have a holiday on Monday. The 19th, they're gonna begin the confirmation hearings in the Senate for key cabinet officials, Secretary of State, Treasury, Homeland Security, and the goal will be to confirm them as soon as possible. So that is a critical role that the Senate must play, and must play as the full Senate. The hearings happen in committee, but then they have to be voted on by the full Senate. I don't think there's going to be any desire to interrupt that work early on. The way it works is the House will approve impeachment managers, and the managers will then literally walk over the articles of impeachment to the Senate and present them to the Senate, what they call exhibit the articles. And then the rules of the Senate require that by 1 p.m. the next day, the Senate will convene to at least start the process. Now, there's a couple elements here. One is the House could decide to hold off and sending those over. Indeed, Jim Clyburn, who's the number 3 Democrat in the House, has said maybe we don't even send them over for 100 days. We give the Senate time to do the critical business that needs to get done, particularly regarding improved COVID vaccine distribution, addressing economic relief for businesses. These are what the president ran on and won on. And I think these are there's a widespread view that this has to happen. This is the more important business of the people. Second is the sense that once the articles get to the Senate, then the Senate has some discretion after they are exhibited. They don't automatically have to go into a trial. They can hold off. At least there's an argument that they can. I think in reality, what this means is this will be a negotiation between Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader, soon to be Majority Leader Schumer, about exactly how they want this process to work out. And a big factor in that, in the Senate, is going to be, are there the votes to convict? If soon to be Minority Leader McConnell decides that he's going to throw his vote in favor of impeachment, I think it will pass. I think they will get the 67 votes. It'll be close, but there's a good chance of that. I think if that seems to be likely, they will probably do the trial sooner rather than later. If it is not likely, if it is clear that the Republicans are going to reject the conviction, then I think they will wait to an appropriate time to do it when the other pressing business is not impacted.
Well, we had a question from Greece. Now we've got two from Turkey. First of all, and this follows exactly from where we are, which is why I picked it. Ersin, I'm sorry, I'm not good at names. Kalaisioglu, I'm sorry, from Turkey. How do you expect the impeachment process to interact and the new administration's initiatives and motions in the U.S. Senate? Will that complicate and slow down the Biden administration's policies? You alluded to it. Ersin wants a bit more. If so, to what extent? Had there ever been a similar precedent in U.S. history? Who wants to go first?
Easy on the last part. No,
Yeah.
There hasn't been nothing even close to this. I mean, I think we all understood we'd be in for a rocky ride and expect the unexpected. I don't think any of us really expected to be in this position 4 years later. And I mean, I'll just add something very quickly, which is that I am told that there is sort of a middle ground where Senator McConnell has asked the Senate parliamentarian whether or not they can sort of split weeks, where they can divide up. It hasn't happened in the past, but that doesn't mean necessarily that it cannot happen in the future, which is to devote certain days to impeachment and certain days to approving the new cabinet and doing the Senate's business. I just want to underscore what Jim said, which is if they don't have the votes, or if the new leadership in the Senate, led by Senator Schumer, does not believe there are votes to convict, then it really is more symbolic. And I do think it makes sense for the incoming administration to focus on unifying themes. The first, second, and third priority of this administration will be COVID, COVID, COVID. They will have to move quickly. People are frustrated with the lack of progress on vaccine distributions. I think many of you watching right now in different parts of the world are doing far better than we are in proportion to your populations. Patience is wearing thin. The economy is collapsing. I mean, we're in pretty bad shape here. And President-elect Biden campaigned on the issue of unifying the country. And these issues will be far more unifying than trying to engage in what will be perceived as a partisan, even if there are Republicans who go along, but as a partisan and punishing attack on his predecessor. So I'm not saying that it won't happen. I think there are very real political considerations that will be taken into account. And I do think there is an element of pragmatism here that the new administration will look to. And my guess is that they will look first to trying to enact as much of their agenda as quickly as possible before turning to a Senate trial for President Trump.
I think historically, transitions between presidents, particularly when there is a shift in party, take a lot longer than people realize. That the top names can be slotted in, but the amount of time it takes to fill in the thousands of positions beneath them, and to get a rhythm and to start building on an actually presidentially or White House driven agenda takes time. We talk about the first 100 days, but in modern history, it's been a lot longer than that to really get an agenda moving. And there will be a number of things that will happen sort of on day one: the reversal of some executive orders, the petition to rejoin the Paris Protocol. Certainly, this will be COVID, and this will be economic relief on many fronts going forward. But a lot of the broad things that need to get done across the government are going to take some time, and they're going to take negotiations with Congress. I think the impeachment piece, although it grabs the most headlines, is probably in some respects the most manageable, because Pelosi and Schumer will control the timing of that. The more challenging thing is, in addition to that, we have a whole series of investigations. They're not just, this is not just Secret Service and FBI investigating those who took over the Capitol, but it is also going to be the congressional, the House and the Senate themselves. There's all, finger pointing and recriminations against members. The division on Capitol Hill is stronger than it's ever been, and frankly, in the country, those divisions are pretty profound. And I think it's going to take a fair amount of time to work through that. That probably more than anything is going to inhibit the fast passing of a Biden agenda.
The only thing I'd add to that, if I can,
sure,
Steve, is that, yes, it does take a lot of time to fill those positions. Some of you may be encouraged or discouraged by this, but we do have a lot of familiar faces that are joining the Biden administration. A lot of folks who really just left office 4 years ago, others who served in the Clinton administration. And so a lot of these folks are very familiar with government. A lot of them will be able to really jump in on day one and not need a lot of time to get their bearings and to bring in and build a team. And so in that sense, compared to an administration filled with a lot of new folks, a lot of outsiders, I remember working on the Clinton transition between Bush, President George Herbert Walker Bush, and President Clinton. And when we came in, we brought a lot of new folks in. We hadn't had the White House as Democrats since Jimmy Carter. It had been a 12-year, walk in the desert. And really, to Jim's point, yes, that honeymoon of 100 days was very, very brief in the sense that our folks took a long time to sort of understand government and understand how to interact internally and to sort of really assume the jobs to the full potential. And almost the full year was gone before everyone sort of got comfortable, and before you know it, everyone is preparing for midterm elections. So in that sense, we do have a lot of experience at the table from day one, and that will enable the administration to really go forward quickly, I think.
I was going to ask the second Turkish question. There are actually three. We'll get to both of them. But given that Jay brought up the topic, Thomas Bochar of the Czech Republic and a good friend of CMED asks the following, which follows exactly what was just said. Who will be the most important people shaping Middle East policy at NSA, State Department, et cetera?
So
one of you going to get on that?
Right. So I think, Jay is exactly right. You'll see a lot of familiar faces. They're already involved in the transition. They were involved in the campaign. People will hold different positions, but for the most part, there have been, at least from what I've seen, no real surprises. From the publicly announced, obviously, starting with Tony Blinken. Tony Blinken is a very seasoned hand as being both Deputy Secretary of State. He was longtime Chief of Staff of the Foreign Relations Committee. He, of course, was Biden's National Security Advisor. Jake Sullivan at NSC has been, was in the Obama White House in senior positions. Wendy Sherman as Deputy Secretary of State, Bill Burns at CIA, Samantha Power at USAID, Victoria Nuland as Undersecretary. These are people that you would see really in some of them in numerous administrations. A lot of reporting is that Brett McGurk is going to be coordinator for Middle East at the NSC. Again, someone who has served in actually Republican and Democratic administrations. So in terms of who's going to be Assistant Secretary for Near East, that's still up in the air. I would expect, knowing a lot of the Biden people, that there will be an emphasis, maybe not necessarily in the Middle East, but across the State Department, to elevate a number of career Foreign Service officers, because I think there's been an impression, certainly among Democratic foreign policy folks, that the Foreign Service was really suppressed and demoralized in the Trump administration, and these are some amazingly talented individuals who will be who hopefully will be promoted and allowed to expand and grow their careers.
I'll just add, Barbara Leaf,
yes,
who is currently at a think tank, for the description you just gave, career Foreign Service officer, rounded out the end of her career recently. A few years ago as U.S. ambassador to the UAE, retired, and has been in a Washington-based think tank. She is supposed to be going back in to the National Security Council. I think she'll have, as well, including the voices and names that Jim has already articulated, I think she'll have a big imprint on policy toward the region.
What I don't think we will see, and I could be always, of course, proven wrong, but I don't think we'll see a high level Middle East envoy appointed right out of the bat like Senator Mitchell was in the Obama administration. I think the Biden administration will focus much more on from the State Department, we're sort of regular order, that they will conduct diplomacy with one exception, and I'll mention that in a second. They will conduct diplomacy in a very traditional way, using a lot of the traditional positions and people and faces throughout the institution, as opposed to creating a whole range of envoys. The one exception is the environment. Secretary Kerry has carved out this role as special advisor, a special envoy for the environment, and this is not just window dressing. I think this is going to be a major emphasis and position within the administration. It will have cabinet rank. And I think from that will flow a lot of international activity and dialogue going forward.
Let's not forget the president himself. This is a president who prides himself on knowing the world and knowing the world leaders, and having, visited X number of world capitals and maintaining those relationships. And I think you'll see him in a very, very upfront and personal role as well. He'll be very dynamic and very present as it relates to foreign policy.
All right. A little bit of a change. The questions are coming in, so we want to get as many as possible answered. This is our second Turkish question, Dr. And again, I apologize if I don't have any Turkish. Dr. Muzaffar Sanel, the Deputy Director of the Center for Modern Turkish Studies. What are the future prospects for Turkish-American relations in general, and specifically, how would be the U.S. response to Turkish-Russian engagement in the Middle East in the coming years? Jay, I think you're more involved in Turkey, but I may be wrong.
I could start a little bit.
Okay, great.
And just say that an overarching theme of a Biden foreign policy is going to be multilateralism. First and foremost, it's rebuilding transatlantic alliances. Working with others to solve problems around the world, not just in the Middle East. I think that does not exclude Turkey and Russia. But I think the Biden administration will have some close talks with Turkey with respect to the region. I think Turkey can play a very important role in the region and must. And the Biden administration recognizes that, or will recognize that. But I think there's also going to be some, you look at it with Brett McGurk and his position, and he was very much involved, and he was the coordinator for the coalition to counter ISIL and the arming of Kurdish militias in Syria as part of that effort, and resigned when we withdrew from Syria on behalf of that. So, but I don't think just because a person took a position in the previous administration means it's going to color everything going forward. And I think that this administration, we recognize that. How do I say we? I'm not part of the administration. I won't be part of the administration. But I think it's broadly, understood in democratic foreign policy circles that we need Turkey to be in the tent, working with the United States as a valued member of NATO. And I think those differences need to be bridged going forward.
Okay. So we've got a big range of questions. There are a lot on the JCPOA. We've got questions from everywhere from Mexico to Russia, and we want to get them all in. But first, let's spend a few minutes on Palestine and Israel. Let's go to Palestine. Sam Bahor from Ramallah. Many are contemplating how much the Biden administration will reverse Trump's many policy actions on Palestine. But is there any hope that instead of reversing, Biden may choose to correct U.S. policy? This is what we've been presented by moving forward, such as recognizing the state of Palestine to confirm the U.S. support for a two-state solution instead of merely reopening the PLO mission in D.C.
I mean, in a word, no. I don't think if that's what you mean by by changing or using your words, correcting American foreign policy, no, I don't expect that. I mean, I think overall, and I think Jim, has referenced this as well. I think you'll see a much more pragmatic approach, much more traditional approach to American foreign policy. And now, surely, the administration will want to re-engage in dialogue with the Palestinians, will want to identify if there are opportunities to improve the situation on the ground, to get folks talking again. I don't think this is going to be something that the new administration is going to jump into on day one. As I think all previous administrations can attest to, there's often very little to be gained by jumping in very, very quickly to Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking. With that said, I think that there will be, efforts to engage the Palestinian leadership, efforts to support people-to-people programs, and as I said at the top, efforts to try and see if there is a way to leverage the new relationships in the region, the Abraham Accords, to the benefit of the Palestinians, to perhaps include them in some of what we already see in the region between Israel and Morocco, and Israel and UAE in particular, in terms of economic opportunities. Is there a way to not only, by the way, bring in Palestinians, bring in Jordanians who sadly seem to be sort of left behind some of the new and exciting changes that are taking place. Egyptians as well, although I think it's a bit more complicated there. So big, bold moves towards Palestine, no, I don't expect that. Changes from the previous administration, absolutely.
I think that Jay's right. Don't look for earth-shattering changes on January 20th. But what I do think is going to happen is that the Biden administration will start trying to reestablish relationships with President Abbas and the PA. the restoration of foreign assistance. Now there was a little bit of daylight when some what we call ESF funds were used to support healthcare in the Palestinian territories just in the last couple months. But for the most part, the Trump administration has had a formal hold on all foreign assistance to the West Bank and Gaza, and I think that will be lifted. I think that there will be a focus on economic development. As part of the recently passed appropriations bills for this year, this was a piece of legislation called the Nita Lowey Middle East Partnership for Peace Act. That provides basically a $250 million fund, $50 million for each of 5 years for investment in the Palestinian private sector. And encouragement for people-to-people links between the United States, Israel, and Palestinians. And I think that's very positive. I think it's going to take a long time to rebuild trust and relationships. Long time being relative. I'm not saying years, but I think it's something that happens gradually. It doesn't happen all on one day. And I think you are going to see a shift back towards a much more traditional U.S. approach towards, what is seen, working with Israelis and Palestinians to maintain the possibility of a two-state solution, even as it becomes more and more difficult to see how that will eventually play out. And finally, I wouldn't get hopes up about the reopening of a PLO office in Washington. A lot has happened in the last 4 years. One of those things was the passing of a piece of legislation called the Anti-Terrorism Clarification Act, which is not waivable by the president and makes it legally very difficult for the PLO to operate in the U.S. in any form without also taking on substantial liability in U.S. courts. And I think that even if the president, and I think there's a good case to be made that's unconstitutional, that the act itself is unconstitutional, but even if the administration were willing to make that argument, I don't know if the PLO would want to take that risk at this time. So, yeah.
Can I add just two things? One, the legislation that you cited, the Nita Lowey piece, it's significant, not only in the funding that it provides for the next 5 years, but in the fact that it was strongly passed with bipartisan support, with some very, very vocal proponents of a strong U.S. foreign policy and presence in the region. And that's significant and again, gives, I think, the new administration at least some additional foundation to move forward. The second thing is sort of a cautionary thing, which is that, we read about some reaction coming from Ramallah in particular, joyous celebration, waiting the arrival of the Biden administration. Historically, I think Palestinians have always felt as though the next administration will give them something the previous administration refused to do. And while there will definitely be differences, not just in tone, but in policy between the Biden administration and the current administration, I wouldn't expect the Biden administration to deliver Palestine on a platter, or statehood on a platter, or a revived peace process. Again, I think there's that's an oversimplification, first of all, of where I think the president-elect is on the issue, and it refuses. I think it negates the fact that the Palestinians have lost ground over the past 4 years, not just because of what's happened in Washington, D.C., but from what's happened in the region as well.
All right. I want to just warn our speakers here that we've got a half hour to go, and we've got a huge number of wonderful questions.
We're going to do the lightning round.
We'll be quick.
As long as we're in Palestine, Makaimer Abu Saida, who I think you both know from Gaza, he asked the following question. President-elect Joe Biden is an aging president. He is 79 now. Will he be capable of dealing with all of these domestic and international problems?
I haven't seen anything that would indicate that President-elect Biden has slowed down mentally or anything else. I think he is incredibly knowledgeable about all foreign affairs. He's forgotten more than many of us ever knew, and I think that he will be the oldest elected president ever, and yet I am confident that this is going to be a very active presidency going forward.
Okay, next question. Taser Al-Khunaisi from Saudi Arabia. What is the prospect for Saudi-American relations? A lot of talk about this. What do you guys think?
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, I think, here's an area where there will be certainly differences than with the current administration. Human rights will be stressed more. Well, first of all, human rights will be stressed. That is a distinction and difference in and of itself. And certainly there are differences vis-a-vis Yemen. And those two issues will be at the forefront of discussions between the new administration and Saudi Arabia. With that said, again, the president-elect understands the importance of U.S.-Saudi relations, understands the important role that Saudi plays in the region, understands that we are on the pathway towards repairing the GCC rift, as well as expanding the Abraham Accords. And I don't think that they'll want to do things that could dramatically upset either of those two processes. But surely the warm and cozy relationship that currently exists, there will be differences tonally and in policy.
And it's not just the Biden administration, it's Capitol Hill as well. Remember, the Congress voted overwhelmingly to disapprove arms sales. President vetoed that. I think that you will see a much more symbiotic relationship between the Hill, particularly now with Democratic control, and the White House on these issues. I think also, we cannot underestimate how disturbed Washington still is with the Khashoggi murder, and I think that will reverberate. And there is a fair amount of press around lawsuits that are tied to that in the United States, and also around the imprisonment of women who were advocating for women's rights. This will be this is going to be an ongoing issue and discussion. All that said, Jay's exactly right. There's no one in the incoming administration who believes that Saudi Arabia is not a critical player, an important ally, and particularly vis-a-vis Iran in the region.
Here's a question from Israel, from Odette Iran. What changes will occur in U.S. policies toward China and NATO? And relevant to this, I just want to warn our speakers that we got about 6 questions about Iran, and I'm going to be asking all of them in one fell swoop next time. And I know that NATO and China relate to the JCPOA as well. Okay.
So I'll take a stab at China. I'm not a China expert at all, but I think the Biden administration will look to there's no naive assumption that China is not an international rival. I mean, this is fully understood on both sides of the aisle. I think what you will see is a toning down of rhetoric that we've seen over the last, really the campaign season, blaming China for the COVID-19 spread. I think all of that said, the way that the United States will look to counter China is through the restoration and building up of alliances. And that goes to the NATO part of the question is, I think one of the first things that Tony Blinken will have on his to-do list is going to Europe, rebuilding those ties with NATO and the bilateral relationships with our European allies.
So the only thing I'll add to that is I agree with Jim. Not only will there be a singular focus on rebuilding transatlantic ties, broadly speaking, but if there's one issue I think domestically where Democrats and Republicans, particularly in the Senate, might be able to work together, it's on how best to confront China in a more constructive way, perhaps, in a more consistent way. But I do think if there's any hope of bipartisanship, you may see that emerge on a new policy vis-a-vis China. Domestically, by the way, I think you'll see that emerge on potentially some massive spending on infrastructure, which was planned under the previous administration, was scrapped early on. It's something that remains popular, would create jobs, and I think help jumpstart the poor economic condition that the country is in right now.
Okay, here's JCPOA. I'm going to read the questions in the order that we have them, and I hope I don't forget any. I'm dealing with a range of questions, but I'm going to try to give everybody who asked the question a shot, since it's all the same topic. Justin Feldman, yesterday's questionnaire, who is from the CMed research team alumnus. We're very proud that a former UCLA student is asking this question as a former UCLA student is speaking. What will the tide of the Abraham Accords mean for Biden's renegotiated terms with the JPOA? Very interesting. The next question comes from Sima Caglio. I got to work on your name, guys. Also from Turkey. What is the likelihood of a new JCPOA when Iran has already reached its 20% enrichment limits? And how would a new deal affect the viability of a reconciliation between GCC members? Is the viability and also the viability of the Abraham Accords? Next, a question in this regard. It comes from Ali Jafari from the United States. What are the main factor and elements that have been changed in the last 4 years that leads us to review and reconsider JCPOA now? And what I believe is last but certainly not least, Hashim al-Hassani, the former speaker of the Iraqi parliament. Will the Biden administration revive the nuclear treaty with Iran? And would it pick up from where it left during the Obama administration? And I believe that's the last of these questions that circle circle the issue, except that one is, as I speak, has just come in from Bassam Barabandi from Syria. We as Syrians did not have a good experience with the Obama administration. It seems that more of the Obama administration is coming back. It's sending alarming signals that Syria may pay the price again in any coming deal with Iran. Good luck, fellas. Who wants to go first?
I'll take a stab at least addressing some of it. I'm sure Jim will have a lot to add as well. I think, as we said at the top, I don't think it's simply just a matter of rejoining the JCPOA. The world has not stopped over the last 4 years. The US, the region, is in a very different place. The Iranians themselves are in a very different place, number one. Number two, to the point of the last question, yes, there are some familiar faces, perhaps many, from both the Obama and the Clinton administration. But the presidents themselves are different. And I don't think just because you have many of the same players that you necessarily have the exact same policy coming out of two different administrations. President Biden will be a different kind of leader and has different experiences to draw upon, and comes to office with a very, very different worldview than the president he served as vice president, President Obama. So again, I think we should give them some time to articulate their policy and not just assume that it will be a replay of what we saw 4 or 6 years ago. I think the third thing I'd say is that some of the president's senior advisors, including Tony Blinken and others, while deeply involved in creating the JCPOA, understand that there were certain deficiencies and certain things that needed to be addressed that weren't addressed the first time around. And I think they'll work to do just that. Missile production, support for proxies, and other efforts to destabilize not just the region, but Africa and other nefarious activities that Iran has been involved with. I think the last thing I'll say is that, and this goes to the differences in the region itself, we've been hearing a lot in Washington about concern about this very issue. And it's not just from Israel, of course, but also from GCC countries. The new thing, I guess, because of the Abraham Accords, is that we do hear about a certain level of coordination and cooperation between Israel and GCC countries in trying to come to Washington, D.C., mount a very aggressive campaign to meet with the Biden officials, convince them of the right track to take, or so forth. And so I think those things will definitely have an impact on what the president decides to do. I do think that there is an interest in trying to curb Iranian activities. I think there's a stated desire by not just the president-elect, but by a good number of members of Congress to rejoin an agreement with Iran. But I don't think it's simply a matter of rejoining the agreement that was left 4 years ago. And I do expect that the team around him will work to address the deficiencies and the concerns of our allies in the region.
I think that's exactly right. The internal logic of the JCPOA when it was first negotiated was let's deal with this one issue of enrichment and build momentum, ideally over the long run, towards addressing all the other important issues, particularly Iran's activities in the region. That is no longer the prevailing sentiment. That any agreement going forward first has to kind of get back on track. So start addressing in a comprehensive way the enrichment issue and nuclearization, but also looking at things like ballistic missile technology, Iran's external actions, destabilizing actions in the region, and have a broader conversation about that. What's changed? Well, I think Iran's changed in many sense internally in their leadership. I think that the killing of Soleimani and others, I think has not Soleimani, but I think that a number of things there. I think that also like you said, the increased enrichment and activities in Iran have created something, and we're 4 years down the line of an agreement that had built-in expiration dates. So all of that, I think, will mean it'll have to be some sort of a new construct, and I think that's sort of where the administration is headed.
All right, huge issue, and if we didn't answer everything, I apologize. Questions that continue to come in. They're great questions, trying to get as many as possible, speakers. Next one is Maria Velasco from the European Union. What role do you see for the EU in the Middle East, especially in relation to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? More specifically, what role do you think the Biden administration will see for the EU in this regard?
Again, I think, as we talked about earlier, the real emphasis on multilateralism is going to be a focus. First, rebuilding transatlantic alliances, and then working with those alliances around the world. I think that we'll see that in partnerships. The way it traditionally works is it's both with the EU as a member of the quartet, if the quartet is if they decide to sort of revitalize that construct. but it's also on a bilateral basis with European allies. And so you'll see in different areas, U.S. partnering with the Germans or the Swedes or the Dutch on various issues throughout the region. I think one interesting thing to think about is where the UK plays in this post-Brexit. Obviously, it's the UK is still a major ally of the United States. How do they play in this now that they are no longer part of the EU? I think that's still to be seen.
The only thing I'll add to that is not just the EU. I mean, again, I think many are wondering if the U.S. sort of regains the primary role of peacemaker in the region with no, this isn't meant to be in a pejorative way, but with Europeans sort of focusing on economic development and maybe shoring up some political relationships here and there. But what role do the countries who've signed on to the Abraham Accords play, in Morocco in particular, because of the large presence of Israelis of Moroccan descent, especially in leadership positions in Israel, because of that economic vitality, because of the unique role that the King of Morocco plays as commander of the faithful, and also on the OIC, on the committee as head of the Al-Quds committee. There are, I think, and because of the very warm relationship that Morocco has always had with its own Jewish community, I think there's a new and perhaps more dynamic role that Morocco specifically, but also some of the other countries can play in the region in helping to sort of broaden the benefits of a peace process to other players in the region.
Okay, so I'm going to combine two questions on the Republican Party and Trump. Konstantin Eggert from Russia: what are the options for the Republican Party for the midterms and for 2024? Will Trump remain an influence on the Republican Party? What about the rising stars? Holly Cotton Crenshaw: please treat it as a complex but one question. And then from Mohammed Shemaisani from Jordan: it looks like Trump is not going to go quietly nor admit he lost a fair election. Are we going to witness acts of instability or tearing the U.S. from his supporters for some time, trying to disrupt the Biden role?
Hard to answer because, I mean, so much can happen in the next week. Let's remember that a week ago Wednesday, we had the violence and the mob at the Capitol. Fast forward 1 week, the president became the first American president to be impeached twice. And next Wednesday, of course, is the inauguration of Joe Biden. Prior to the violence at the Capitol, I would have answered that question by saying that surely President Trump will remain a fixture in American politics. And you saw that in the hesitancy of people in his own party to take him on, to criticize him on the issue of challenging the election results and certifying the election results and so forth. I think it's a different situation today. There were also expectations, by the way, that following his departure, that he would perhaps start up a news network to challenge Fox News, even potentially create a new political party. I'm not so sure that happens. And of course,
yes, I'm going to interrupt you because I should have added a third question on this topic from Joaquin Patron from Mexico. Will a successful impeachment give birth to a third political party in the U.S.? Exactly what you were just talking about. Sorry for intervening.
No, that's fine. And Steve, I think part of it is, and that will actually factor into the calculations of Mitch McConnell and other Republicans. If they see this as really an opportunity to rid themselves of Donald Trump, to rid themselves of his influence, they may vote for conviction in the U.S. Senate, assuming there's a trial in the U.S. Senate. I think the further away we get from the acts at the U.S. Capitol, assuming that there are no further acts of violence, the more likely it is that he won't be convicted. But you see some efforts by the president himself, too little, too late, to call upon his followers to not act in a violent manner and to condemn this. It was read by Congressman Jim Jordan, a strong ally of the president still in the U.S. House of Representatives, and a video that the White House itself put out. We'll have to see what happens. I mean, right now, I'm sure most of you are aware, the FBI is issuing alerts. Most people are being told to stay away from Washington, D.C. on Election Day, which is unprecedented. All 50 state capitals are expecting some form of protest or some form of, efforts to potentially disrupt the inauguration here in Washington, D.C. The Capitol is completely cordoned off by fencing. We spoke before about the presence of 15 to 20,000 troops. We just don't know what the next 6 to 7 days will look like. And that, of course, will impact, I think, greatly the legacy and the ability of this president to still have an impact on things moving forward. I'll end my part by just saying, two things. One, as of today, I just saw his approval ratings are at an all-time low. They were pretty low to begin with. His disapproval ratings were always higher than his approval ratings. They've dropped even further. And the last thing I'll say is that whether he remains a force in American politics or not, as we said at the top, 73 million Americans still voted for this president. Now, I think we have to be careful not to group all 73 million Americans in the same category as those who stormed the US Capitol. I don't think for a minute they are all like that. But we do have to find a way as Americans, as partisans, as Democrats, as Republicans. I don't think either party has done a very good job of understanding the concerns of many Trump voters. We failed in 2016. I think we largely failed as well in the last election. And that's in part why you saw perhaps a rejection of Trump himself, but not Trumpism. I mean, it wasn't this this extraordinary wave for Democrats, despite all the anarchy and chaos of the last 4 years. The country is deeply divided. We have to find ways to address both the economic concerns that exist in the country, and we have to find a way to talk to, in particular, middle America, rural America, and we're just not doing a very good job of that. And if he continues, and if his supporters continue to be able to exploit those concerns and those fears, then perhaps he will find a way to remain relevant over the next 4 years.
I think that when Democrats lose an election, there's a lot of hair pulling. There's a lot of reflection. We organize circular firing squads. And it's a very long, drawn out, painful process of reconciling with the loss. The Republicans don't do that. There may be a little bit of analysis here and there, but they kind of march on. And I think that's even more profound because this wasn't what we call a wave election. This wasn't an election where Democrats just trounced Republicans across the boards, even though, and Jay mentioned kind of the inconsistent polling leading into this, that we were anticipating before the Georgia runoffs that we would have actually had a good shot at taking control of the Senate, enlarging the margins in the House, and that didn't come to fruition. We lost seats in the House. We barely got through the Georgia runoffs to get to a 50-50 tie in the Senate, and I think the only reason that we were able to win those two Georgia runoffs is because of the activities of the president that came after the election. That he actually had a lot of ways, he and his supporters had a lot of ways of actually dissuading votes in Georgia. Not to underestimate the power of local organizing that took place in Georgia, that really gave Democrats a fighting shot in that state, was truly momentous. I think that historically midterm elections have been bad for the incumbent party. And I don't think there's anyone in Washington who thinks that the next 2 years the elections are going to be much different. I think what you saw in this election was this really profound rural-urban split. I think that's probably, if we had to say one thing that defined and predicted how American voters would vote, it was whether you are in a rural district or a perceived urban district. And where the swing was, where the margins were not in the suburbs. Democrats largely did very, very well in the urban suburbs. It is what we would call the exurbs, the next counties out. That is the new, what we would call the purple area. It is the red became redder, the rural areas became redder, the cities became deep blue, and the fighting is now on the margins of those urban areas.
But Jim, also, I mean, we have to also recognize that the president did better among African Americans and Hispanics,
yep,
for certain reasons in South Florida and so forth, than he did last time around as well. And those are things that we need to understand better as well. And we lost state legislatures and governorships.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, there was a sense that both parties were not meeting the needs of folks with respect to economic development and opportunity, and that's true both in urban and rural areas, and that the president was at least speaking to those areas. I think that, you know, Jay is exactly right. The president's reputation is nowhere near where it was the day after Election Day. It has taken a dramatic turn for the worse. I think the political fortunes of the Trump children are now much bleaker than they were even before the 6th. You know, you had on the 6th at the rally, Donald Trump Jr. saying that the party leaders need to reconcile themselves with the fact that this is the party of Trump. This is his party now. That's no longer the case. That is in question. It is not definitively not the party of Trump, but it is at least a pretty big issue of debate. I think Ivanka's chances of taking a Florida Senate seat have probably declined. But, you know, don't count the president out yet. I think it is still history to be written.
All right, one last question, but I'm cheating a little bit. It's a group. We've got so many great questions. I picked a few, not all of them, and I apologize profusely. Mohammed Abdel Fattah from Gaza, ahead of Israeli elections in March, with a very possible win of Netanyahu. How do you see Biden-Netanyahu relations considering the bad Obama-Netanyahu relations? And then similar questions, and answer what you can, guys. From Egypt, Ahmed Ezad, will the Biden administration have the bandwidth for the democratic and human rights decay in Egypt, and how? And then from Sri Lanka, Nimal Navartan. I know I messed that up. Do you see great change in U.S. foreign policies with the incoming president? And finally, I know you can't get it all. Alia Mubayad from London. Many economies in the Middle East are under extreme economic distress, are heading increasingly on an unstable path, in particular Lebanon, Iraq, and Tunisia. What do you think the next Biden administration can do to support them, in particular Iraq and Lebanon? I apologize to everyone who couldn't ask, and for our speakers who I asked too much.
Well, let me take a little bit of this on the relations with Prime Minister Netanyahu. You know, I think shortly after the election, I think Netanyahu either tweeted out or said, you know, I've known Joe Biden for 45 years and we have this long-standing relationship. And I can't remember who the commentator was in the United States, but they said, yeah, but Biden has known Netanyahu for 45 years as well. That said, look, Biden contrasts a different relationship. You know, Trump pretty much, you know, did whatever Netanyahu really wanted. Biden is a very strong friend of Israel, and you know, will not, I think, just do what the prime minister asks him to do, but do what is in the United States' interest and what he believes in is in Israel's long-term interest, which in a lot of respects is a peaceful relationship with its Palestinian neighbors and the region. I think there was a bunch of things in there on the economic piece, economic relations. You're absolutely right about real deep economic challenges in the region, both broadly because of COVID and the recovery from the pandemic, but also in specific areas of Lebanon, Iraq, and others. And I think, and maybe this is partly wishful thinking, but because this is the business that I'm involved in, but I think that the administration will look at economic tools, economic development tools, as a very powerful piece of their diplomatic toolbox for how to engage with the region. Why do I say that? Well, one area is that at the appointment of Samantha Power as AID, she is a seasoned diplomat, but also giving her a seat on the National Security Council. So weaving in economic development into that piece. The other piece that I think is important, and we talked about earlier the Partnership for Peace Act, which was specifically to West Bank and Gaza, but I think using the tools of the United States Development Finance Corporation, which is the creation of bipartisan of the last years of what they call the BUILD Act. There's a lot of bipartisan support on the Hill, and a lot of people in the administration that think using development finance tools in the region should be an elevated piece of our whole foreign policy offering.
Jay,
I'll just close out with just a couple of things here. Totally agree. I mean, Joe Biden is no stranger to Israel. I think there are many who would agree in a very bipartisan way that a strong, safe, and secure Israel is in America's interest, and vice versa. More broadly, a strong and predictable America, an America that acts with strength and with certainty. And an America that renews, as we've talked about many times over the last hour plus, renews its traditional relationships across the Atlantic and beyond, will help not only repair relationships moving forward, but I think it will help lend itself to a more stable economic environment as well. And I think you'll see that. Sorry, you hear my dog in the background here. You'll see that moving forward from this administration. You'll see a very pragmatic and strong and straightforward kind of foreign policy coming from President-elect Biden.
Well, unfortunately, that is the end of our program. Exciting, so much more to discuss. On behalf of us all, thank you for being with us, Jay and Jim.
Thank you, by the way, Steve. Thank you and Manny.
A marvelous discussion. We really appreciate your willingness to answer so many questions, even when I cheated a little bit. I would also like to thank our amazing staff, Salome Mahajer and Emily Pistol, who run our events so smoothly. CME has other events forthcoming that we hope you won't want to miss. In fact, on January 28th, which is coming up, join us for an expert panel discussing China-MENA relations in the past and future. Our office will be in touch with you with the details. And of course, we want to wish everyone the best health-wise. Hope everyone takes care so they are not harmed by the coronavirus. And so let me thank all of you for joining us today for this very exciting and stimulating event. Depending on where you are, good lunch, good dinner, or good night. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.